I am considered a Bolshevik and a Red and a W and a radical, and I admit being all they charge me with. I'm anything that will change this moneyed civilization to a higher and grander civilization for the ages to come. And I long to see the day when Labour will have the destinies of the nation in her own hands, and that she will stand a united force and show the world what the workers can do.
We don't want your millions, mister. We don't want your diamond rings. All we want is food for our babies. Give me back my job again. Yes, I don't want your millions, mister. I don't want your brand new yacht. All I want is a decent living. Give me back what I have not. Now you can call me dumb, if you will, mister. Call me blue, green, or red. Here's one thing I know, mister. These hungry children, they must be fed. And I don't want your millions, mister. I don't want your diamond ring. All I want is food for these babies. Give me back my job again. There we are.
The woman we're here to honor today, Mary Harris Jones, Mother Jones, was called the most dangerous woman in America. Now that's a surprising sentiment, because when those words were spoken by a West Virginia district attorney in 1902, Mother Jones was 65 years old, a widow, a former seamstress, a grandmotherly woman. Hardly the image that the phrase most dangerous woman in America would normally conjure up. Despite her age, she was one of the most fiery left-wing speakers and union organizers of her era. She was a founding member of the Radical Industrial Workers of the World. She was an organizer for the Knights of Labor, for the United Mine Workers, and for the Socialist Party of America. And most importantly, she was a leader who built solidarity among workers, among their wives, and even among their children. For the entrenched industrial and economic elite of her era, Mother Jones was indeed dangerous, because her voice and her advocacy threatened their power, their wealth, and their entire world. She told people she was born on May 1st, 1830. In reality, she was slightly younger, probably having been born in August of 1837. But her choice of birthdays tells us a lot about who she was and what she stood for. She wanted to appear older than she was, to embrace the character of Mother Jones, whose boys toiled in the mines of America and fought in the bloody labor wars of the turn of the century. And she wanted to be born on May Day, the most important day of the year for radical unionists, socialists, and anarchists. Today, the celebration of May Day as a radical holiday has faded from public consciousness. But May 1st was a holy day to Mother Jones, as it was to many others in the American labor movement. May Day was a celebration that honored the sacrifices of the Haymarket martyrs, 4 innocent men who were unjustly executed by the state of Illinois because they were anarchists and labor activists. In May of 1886, A peaceful labor rally turned violent when the Chicago police attacked the crowd listening to a radical speaker. In the confusion, someone threw a dynamite bomb, killing and wounding workers and police officers. In the wake of the disaster, trade union leaders and radical activists were arrested and hounded, and ultimately 4 men paid the ultimate price for a crime that everyone admitted they hadn't actually committed. The Haymarket Affair was one of the many events that transformed Mary Harris Jones into Mother Jones. She'd been born in Ireland, and her early life was full of tragedy. When she was around 30 years old, her husband, a union organizer for the Iron Molders Union, and her 4 children died during a yellow fever epidemic in Memphis, Tennessee. With the loss of her family, Mary moved to Chicago, where she worked as a seamstress until her home, shop, and possessions were lost in the Great Chicago Fire of 1872. Left without a home, a family, or a profession, Mary Jones embraced a labor movement and would ultimately become one of its greatest leaders. She will be forever linked to the history of union miners in America. As an organizer for the United Mine Workers, she was instrumental in keeping morale high among strikers and in organizing women and children to support and strengthen the union. In what is probably her most famous action, Mother Jones organized an army of child laborers, workers in textile mills and mines in Pennsylvania. Called her Children's Crusade, this army of young workers marched from Pennsylvania to New York to confront President Theodore Roosevelt at his home. But here in Illinois, in Mount Olive, the labor struggle that is most associated with Mother Jones is one she was actually not present for. In 1898, in nearby Verdon, Illinois, a battle took place between striking mine workers and private detectives working for the Chicago Verdon Coal Company. The miners had gone out on strike when the coal company had refused to recognize their union or pay them a living wage, a union wage. The mining company responded by bringing in trains full of strikebreakers. The union miners armed themselves and successfully turned back 2 trains full of strikebreakers, although at a great cost to themselves. 7 of the union miners had been killed during a battle with private detectives hired to protect the train. Private detectives who'd been ordered by the coal company to shoot to kill any workers that stood against them. We need to remember that the resistance of these workers to the armed thuggery of coal companies so inspired Mother Jones that she asked to be buried here in the Union Miners Cemetery next to the labor martyrs who died in the Battle of Verdun. And so we are called to look more deeper into this event to understand why Mother Jones called the Verdun miners her boys and honored them with her presence even after her death. The Verdun miners fought for their union. They fought for a living wage, for the right to their jobs, for their dignity. It was this fighting spirit, this willingness to face death, that inspired Mother Jones and should inspire us today. The plaques on the front of this monument commemorate 4 men who fought in the Battle of Verdun, 3 of whom died in the conflict. One of them has a quote that perfectly sums up why we need to embrace the Battle of Verdun, why we need to let it inspire us as it inspired Mother Jones. And it's the one behind the flowers, actually. The plaque reads, "He thought it better to be dead, to die for liberty and his friends, than to live in bondage or just for bread." To die for liberty and his friends. Liberty and friends is probably the best description of what it is at the heart of the union movement that I have ever heard. Unions then and today fight for liberty, the liberty of a living wage, of dignity at work, of a safe workplace. And they fight for solidarity, the bond between working men and working women, between friends that humanizes labor. Today we are lucky that the corporate opponents of labor in this country no longer can hire private armies to shoot down striking workers in cold blood. We are lucky that our union members no longer need to arm themselves for safe self-protection against private corporate violence. But the fight for liberty and for friends continues today, just as it did 100 years ago in Verdun, Illinois. Mother Jones, remember, had been called the most dangerous woman in America. The man who called her that did so because he claimed she could crook her finger and 20,000 men would go out on strike, would stand up for their liberty and for their friends. And that did make Mother Jones a dangerous woman, dangerous to entrenched capital, dangerous to industrial barons, dangerous to those who would deny working men and women their dignity and their friends. I want to close today by suggesting that we should all try to be dangerous men and women, like Mother Jones was in her day. The battles that she fought in are still being fought today, even if today they're fought with picket signs rather than Winchester rifles. The world needs more men and women to fight for what is right, more men and women who can crook their fingers and call out 20,000 men out on strike. And so as we remember Mother Mary Harris Jones today, 81 years after her death, let us also remember to embrace not only her history, but also her causes. A vast many workers toil today without dignity, without liberty on the job. It is our job to dangerously stand with these men and women, our friends, and help them fight for liberty, for justice, and for a union.
One of the things I wanted to do, I got a book called Mother Jones Speeches and Writings, and she said a lot of things in 1910 that it's the same damn thing that's happening today. We've really gone backwards. All the things that working people fought for in this country for all those years are now being put on the table and taken away by corporate America. Here in Illinois, there's a group called the Chicago Civic Federation. We don't hear about them much here. They're in the papers all the time in Chicago. You hear about the Koch brothers in Wisconsin. Well, these guys, there's over 100 of them. They're the top CEOs from all the major corporations in America. McDonald's, all of them. They sit on the Chicago Civic Federation. Also, you got the big banks and the financiers. And every day they're putting out information in the Chicago Tribune. They buy ads in the television to do away with public worker pensions. They're saying that's destroying the state economy, is public workers' pensions, when the average pension for a worker in the state is $30,000, and most of them CEOs are bringing over $1 million in retirement and going up. They don't want anybody to talk about that. They want to talk about that public workers' pension. They also want to privatize all of government. They came out with a paper in July, printed by the Tribune, put out as a public paper, that all services in government should be privatized. They want to do away with union jobs in government. So that Chicago Civic Federation in this state is attacking workers on a daily basis, spending big corporate money to keep workers down and buy as many politicians as they can to support their cause. But Mother Jones, when she went out and about, and most of her writings are saved because she spoke at conventions. She did a lot of speaking on the stump. You can't find too many collections with those speeches, but anything she spoke at a convention was recorded. This first little paraphrase is from January 1909, and she devoted this speech to encourage miners to present a united front to outsiders and to the need for solidarity among all laborers. And she said, "You must remember, it is the organized man and the modern machine that will lick you by and by. It is the brain of the genius working out on modern lines that is going to interfere with your prosperity by and by. And every uneducated, every undeveloped worker will be used by that class to fight us. It is no reflection on you, brave boys. I simply call attention to the nest of scabs and advise you to get them organized and educated, and organize and educate them not only in Illinois and Missouri, but wherever you find them. The man has to be paid for organized labor. Well, I don't care much about him, and what she's talking about is paying for union organizers. Each one of us should be an organizer, and we should not wait for any commission from any president of a union. We should all be organizers in every field, and not only organize the workers, but those poor slaves of the pen as well, and get them with us. And by that she meant the newspaper workers. In closing, she said, I want to say to you, shake hands with each other and let the boys who are here for the paper spread the news that you are the jolliest and most harmonious and loving family there is in the nation. On you and around you are built other organizations. If you become weak, the forces of every craft will become weak. When you become strong, you strengthen the forces of every other craft. You must not be narrow. For the first time in human history, we are able today to touch the wire, and even over in Japan, we can say what happened that next day. And that was just the telegraph. Now we have the internet. It's seconds. We don't even have to wait a day. Then there was a motion made from the floor to thank Mother Jones. And she replied, "You have been trained under the capitalist. We don't owe a vote of thanks to any living being on earth, but we owe a vote of condemnation to every human being that does not rise up and do his duty." She gave hell to not only the mine workers at the convention. She mentioned also in a speech in 1910, talking about women, and there was some dissension because women workers were being used in the breweries to replace men, and she went up to organize them. The men just complained that women were taking their job. And it was her point was we have to organize all workers. And she said, when this nation gives back to her womanhood the economic rights they have stolen from them, when this nation gives back to childhood the right to be well-born and well cared for, and when this nation gives back the right to the motherhood of the nation, the time to mold and train the children well, want will cease, robbery will cease, jails will be no more, there will be institutions for the uplift of this race, not for its degradation. And then lastly, I talked earlier about the Civic Federation. Well, the Civic Federation was going on back then, and it was initially founded by the capitalist organizations, the big institutions, the big corporations, to try to co-opt labor to come in and let's all be one big happy family, labor management, rah, 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 and so that the corporations could go on with their plan. She says, let me say to you, the only real dual organization there is in this country is the Civic Federation and the gang of robbers on Wall Street. That is the dual organization against labor. And I want to tell you, fellows, in the Central Field, bury your hatchet, take a day off, get your skulls to working instead of your jaws. I happened to be in the Central Field a long time ago before those fellows who were blowing off hot air were in the Union and they were scabbing. I am glad you were in the Union, however. I know how a scab is made up. One time, there was an old barrel up near heaven, and all of heaven got permeated with the odor. God Almighty said, "What is that stuff that smells so?" He was told that it was some rotten chemical down there in a barrel and was asked what could be done with it. He said, "Spill it in a lot of bad clay and maybe you can turn out a scab." That is what a scab is made of, and he has been rotten all down the ages. We have a few scabs in Pennsylvania, Mr. President, and once in a while we get hold of one of them and lick them. I have licked lots of them, and I expect to lick more of them before I die. Now I'm going to speak to you of the question of machinery, and I want to draw your attention to the fact that they have reached into China and are developing industries there. This is in 1911. Capitalism is in business for profit, and wherever it is going to realize the most profit out of human blood, there it is going. So they have reached into China where they can hire men for 8 cents and 10 cents a day. The result is we are feeling it here all along the line. Excuse me. The merchants of Westmoreland County here in Pennsylvania called the council together and asked if they would not pass an ordinance demanding the mounted constabulary be placed in Greensburg. At the time, they were looking at strikes in Pennsylvania and they're going to bring in mounted police. And she goes on to say, the scabs were not a bit afraid to come into town, but the merchants were so full of greed and avarice, they did not realize where they were struck. They wanted the constabulary to protect them against a handful of miners, but they never thought of calling in the constabulary to see after Standard Oil. Standard Oil has taken over 84 of the great department stores in this country, and it is the onward march of civilization. And so it is that we must centralize our forces to one great mighty column. And Mother Jones constantly spoke about solidarity among the workers, and that's the way that we get ahead. You can't look for any place outside of labor. A lot of people talk about the teabaggers today. We don't have anything to fear about the teabaggers. We have to fear about our own dissension and our own inability to organize workers. The teabaggers aren't going to keep us from anything. It's us that is going to keep us from getting ahead. So I encourage everybody here to go back, when you get back home, there's a lot of things that are going to be happening in the next months ahead as the Civic Federation and the corporations and the state legislature continue their attack on working people. Join in on those marches.
Some people say man isn't made out of mud, but a poor man's made out of muscle and blood. It's muscle and blood and it's skin and bones. And a mind that's weak and a back that's strong. You load 16 tons, what do you get? Another day older and deeper in debt. St. Peter, don't you call me, 'cause I can't go, 'cause I owe my soul to the company store. I was born one morning, sun didn't shine. I picked up my shovel and I walked to the mine. I loaded 16 tons of your number 9 coal. The straw boss said, well, bless my soul. You load 16 tons, what do you get? Another day older and deeper in debt. St. Peter, don't you call me, 'cause I can't go. I owe my soul to the company store. If you see me coming, you better step aside. A lot of men didn't and a lot of men died. It's a one fist of iron and the other is steel. The ribbon don't get your friend, the left one will. You load 16 tons, what do you get? Another day older and deeper in debt. St. Peter, don't you call me, 'cause I can't go. I owe my soul to the company store.